Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to travel way back in time to ancient China. We're going to look at a really fascinating power struggle, a struggle between emperors and their most unusual servants. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll start with this really mysterious moment when an emperor got super angry. That leads us to this strange situation, this paradox about the palace eunuchs. Then, we're going to uncover what the emperor was most afraid of, his own information blind spot. After that, we'll look at his very clever solution, see how it actually worked in a real-life situation, and then, at the end, we'll ask the big question, was all of this a necessary evil? Okay, so our story kicks off in the year 1013. We've got an emperor on the throne named Zhenzong, and let me tell you, he was not happy. You can tell he was really unhappy with his eunuchs. These were the special male servants who worked right there in his palace. In just a couple of months, he laid down two brand new, very strict laws just for them. Then he wrote a personal warning. And he didn't just write it down, he had it carved into a huge stone monument for absolutely everyone to see. I mean, talk about sending a message. He was making it crystal clear they had to be controlled. But here's where it gets really interesting, because this anger creates a puzzle. While Emperor Zhenzong was very publicly trying to control his eunuchs, he, and pretty much every other emperor, also believed he couldn't possibly rule without them. And that, right there, is the heart of what we call the eunuch paradox. Okay, so to really get this paradox, we first need to be clear on what a eunuch was. A eunuch was a man who had been castrated. Now, that's the most important detail here, because it meant he could never have children, never start his own family. And because of that, his whole life, all of his goals, were tied completely and totally to the emperor. And that created this really unique position in society. On the one hand, they had the lowest social status you can imagine. They were seen as, incomplete servants, basically palace slaves with no real power. But on the other hand, they could have enormous, incredible power. Why? Because they were the people physically closest to the emperor. They controlled who got to see them, and a lot of the time when they spoke with his authority. So that leads us to the big question, right? If these guys were so much trouble, if they were so difficult to manage, why were they also so important? Why didn't the emperors just get rid of them? Well, the answer is all about the emperor's single greatest weakness. And you might think that weakness was, assassins or a rival army, but nope, it was information. We've all heard that saying, information is power. Well, for an emperor, that wasn't just a nice phrase. It was everything. It was the key to survival. Just imagine being an emperor, all alone in your palace. You would always be afraid of being in the dark. You'd worry that your officials, the powerful men actually running the government for you, weren't giving you the whole story. Maybe they were hiding bad news, or maybe they were all working together to trick you. So to fight this fear, to get out of the dark, emperors turned more and more to eunuchs. And they didn't just use a few of them, they used thousands. Just look at this. By the time Emperor Renzong was in charge, the number of eunuchs had exploded to over 4,000. Think about that. It went from just 50 at the start of the dynasty to 4,000. They weren't just servants anymore. They were basically becoming the emperor's private spy agency. So how exactly did an emperor fight this information blindness? Well, the solution was actually pretty clever. He created many different ways or channels to get his news. The main rule was, never ever rely on just one source of information. The emperor's daily schedule was practically a weapon in this information war. Sure, he had the big public meetings for all the official business, but then he'd have smaller private meetings with just his top ministers. And then he had even more secret meetings where the guest list was hidden and arranged by his eunuchs. He created all these layers of secrecy, making sure that no single group of officials could ever control what he heard. And the eunuchs, well, they were the secret weapon in this whole system. They gave the emperor a totally separate, independent way to check, or as we might say, to cross-verify, everything that his powerful officials were telling him. All right, let me tell you a quick, true story that shows exactly how this worked in real life. You have the prime minister, a guy named Wang Don. He suggests that another official should get a promotion. The emperor thinks about it and says, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. But then, the very next morning, the prime minister brings up the promotion again, and nothing. The emperor is silent. He doesn't approve it. Now, imagine you're the prime minister.
You would be totally confused, right? What could have possibly happened overnight to make the emperor completely change his mind?
Well, the answer came from the emperor's secret channel, one of his eunuch spies. The spy told him that the official who was up for promotion had tried to secretly visit the prime minister's house the night before. Now, the prime minister actually refused to see him, but that didn't matter. Just the attempt to create that secret private connection, that was enough to make the emperor suspicious. And just like that, one tiny piece of secret information changed everything. The emperor avoided promoting someone he just couldn't trust anymore. So you start to see the picture, right? You can see why emperors felt that eunuchs were a huge problem, but also kind of necessary. And this whole system, this idea of using eunuchs as spies, it wasn't new at all. It actually started with the very first emperor of the Song dynasty. Way back at the beginning, the first Song emperor sent one of his most trusted eunuchs out with his army generals on the battlefield. The eunuch's job was simple, just be the emperor's eyes and ears. His job was to make sure those powerful generals, who were miles and miles away from the palace, always remembered exactly who was in charge. It was all about ensuring loyalty. This quote right here really captured what it was like. Life in the palace court was a constant, daily battle, not with swords, but with information and control. And in that kind of battle, an emperor needed soldiers who were loyal only to him. And the eunuchs, with no family, no outside allegiances, they were the most loyal soldiers he could possibly find. And so, this whole story from ancient China leaves us with a really big question, one that still feels important today. When all the power is in the hands of just one person, can they ever really get the true, clear picture of the world? Or is any leader at the very top always, in some way, fighting to see the truth from inside the walls of their own palace?